I'm right.
And that really impresses me. Those qualities really impress me. But when on top of that, you've got a first-rate intelligence. I mean, university teachers who say he was the brightest student they ever had, you're impressed.
I'm right, am I not, in recalling that you were not confident about Barack Obama's election, that you thought Hillary Clinton was, from the Democrats' perspective, the better choice?
I did. I thought the answer to the question, who's most likely to defeat a Republican, Obama or Hillary, would have to come up Hillary. Yet the emotion generated in most of those Democrat primaries saw a surge behind him. Very largely, if you look at South Carolina, for example, black voters motivated turnout in big numbers. And I just thought, especially with the Jeremiah Wright controversy, this is not the right message for conservative, working-class white voters. But the economic downturn really resolved that. From September 15 and the collapse of Lehman Brothers, he moved ahead from the polls. Now, whether he would have done it without the economic collapse is a point we'll never know. But he certainly was not consistently ahead in the polls until you saw that financial collapse.
You have talked previously about the so-called Bradley effect. Did that essentially negate the Bradley effect?
Yes. Yeah. This election has seen paid to the Bradley effect, and probably in talking about it, I and others were a bit glib, because there'd been a couple of elections where black candidates stood that suggested the Bradley effect was no longer at work. In other words, white voters were no longer saying, oh sure, I'll vote for the endorsed Democrat, and then in the privacy of the polling booth, thinking, no, on the bottom line, I'm not going to vote for a black man. And there were a couple of elections that suggested they'd got over that, and that is why Obama's election, in confirming that race is in the past, was such a wonderful, wonderful thing. I mean, we are closer to the day with Obama's election, to use the language of Martin Luther King, where race matters less. The colour of your skin matters less than the content of your character. And that's a glorious thing, not just for America, but for the whole world. Think of the promise that offers black kids, minority kids, in poor backgrounds in American schools, the prospect that they won't be judged on the colour of their skins. And it sends a message all around the world. It sends a message as well. The world might get over these entrenched ethno-religious differences.
I want to go back to the financial crisis and America's reaction to that, and the signs that there is a push beginning to emerge for greater protection for US industry. Also the fact that Obama himself does not apparently place a great deal of significance on trade as a critical economic element for the US. As one writer has put it, he's more interested in the jobs of US auto workers than he is in, say, completing the Doha round or cutting agricultural subsidies in the US.
Here I put my faith in the intelligence of the man. I reckon when he's sitting in the Oval Office and he's got those economic advisors, and they're all serious people, they're taken seriously, they know their brief, he will be persuaded that the one thing that would turn this into something akin to the Great Depression is for America to start lifting tariff barriers. Because remember, it was the Smoot-Hawley tariff introduced by a panicked US Congress in the middle of the Great Depression that entrenched the Depression around the world. If you start restricting trade, locking out Chinese imports, as the economy wobbles and teeters, as it's been doing, you'll go downhill fast. And I think he's intelligent enough to know that any move in a protectionist direction would send a terrible message to the rest of the world.
George Soros recently commented that unlike previous financial crises where the problem has been caused by an external shock like a sudden hike in oil prices, in this case the problem occurred within the financial sector itself. From where you sit as a former politician and also of course from your experience with Macquarie Bank, what do you think is the answer to this whole problem? What do you think Obama will do?
I think there's going to be more regulation of the finance sector, and that means restricting the capacity of the institutions to invent these new high-risk financial products. So America had this strange phenomenon of high-risk loans, subprime mortgages. The banking system in Australia and in most parts of the world would never contemplate extending housing loans to people who've got no job, got no assets, got no wealth, got no income. Yet America did it. And then America committed a graver sin. The financial sector rolled up all these mortgages into securitized products and started trading in them, selling them, buying them, with parties involved who didn't understand how flawed the component parts of the packages were. And I just think there's going to be regulation as soon as Congress gets around to it that says you don't introduce a new financial product just as you don't introduce a new medicine unless it's been thoroughly tested first. And I think any resistance to this from the finance sector is going to be given very, very short consideration.
One classic response to that, of course, would be that regulation kills competition, or that competition is necessary to boost economic growth. But of course, in this instance, the problem is the whole issue has gotten out of hand.
I think we've all learned that competition is good for the economy. This has not been brought about by competition. Competition has yielded huge benefits. We've all enjoyed higher living standards as a result of the freeing up of world economies since around 1980. But this is something different. This is the invention of flawed financial products and their marketing around the world. And America did it. It was a terrible flaw in the American system. The Australian system and Australian institutions, all our banks, not just Macquarie, resisted this and have survived better because they did. I think America will veer towards more regulation, but it will be healthy regulation.
How do you see the American-Australian relationship?
Look, I think it's very good. I think we've got to be careful that with all the other demands being placed on America around the world, it doesn't get relegated and it doesn't get neglected. But on both sides of politics, we've had very nimble-footed leadership. John Howard developed a special relationship with George W. Bush. It was based on us yielding up troops for Iraq. We all know that. But he exploited that well. Kevin Rudd was able, on his trip to Washington, to have meetings with Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and John McCain. Now that suggests some very, very good work by the Australian Embassy and a serious investment of time by Kevin Rudd, both when he was in opposition and after he became Prime Minister. On both sides of politics, we've paid a lot of attention to this relationship, and I think it will continue to be very healthy. Kevin Rudd was on the phone to Barack Obama a day after his election, and that's one good measure of it. There wouldn't have been, and something that can't be assumed in every country of the world.
I hear what you say, but there have been conflicting reports coming out of Washington. On the one hand, that the State Department will be very much Eurocentric. On the other, the fact that the American-Australian leadership dialogue has helped build strong relationships right throughout the administration. From where you sit, how important do you think that leadership dialogue has been?
I think the dialogue has been vitally important. It's got, you see Kurt Campbell, who was there under Clinton, coming back into power in charge of Asian policy under this president. And he's been in contact with Australia over the last 8 years through the Australian-American Leadership Dialogue. He's got to know all of us. And as a result, Australia's guaranteed access. The Australian Prime Minister, the Australian Foreign Minister can pick up the phone and talk problems through. I think we've got credibility in America because of our role in peacekeeping, Solomon Islands, Timor, for example. And yes, as a fierce opponent of our commitment to Iraq, I think it's got to be said that the one positive thing you can say about it, from Australia's point of view, is that it won us brownie points in Washington, and not just with Republicans.